And then when we win on that one, we give them another one and another one and another one and another one. And we get people actively involved as activists in the liberty movement and have them learn to actually win, not just express their frustration and their anger and, rage and shake their fist at the sky in impotent rage, but actually find things that we can win on and encourage people to join us to win in those causes and help people who need help now to get the government off of their back, and then do the next one and the next one and the next one. And in doing so, consistently explain to them that this is why we need to expect and demand that we are respected as individual human beings.
Welcome to the Drop the Mask podcast, dropping knowledge and infiltrating the hive mind of mainstream thought. I'm here to break down what's wrong with our systems, leaders, and institutions. I'm your host, Jason. Welcome back to Drop the Mask. I am thrilled to welcome this next guest. You know him as the Libertarian Vice Presidential candidate for 2020. He's the founder and president of You Are the Power. And he's the man who controls the Jewish space laser. So watch out. Spike Cohen, welcome to the show.
Actually,
how you doing?
Have it here. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. And I do actually have, in case anyone wants to get uppity, I always have it nearby. And I will use it if necessary. I don't want to use it, but I will use it. No, I'm happy to be on, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. While you have that in your hands, I will say 100% support for Israel and the Jewish people. I love you all. Anyway,
I'm not a supporter of the Israeli government, so I did not realize that was contingent. I may have to give it back now. I apologize.
No, just joking around. So you're at Porcfest over the weekend. You got to speak right after Ron Paul, and I know he called in virtually, but what was that experience like for you?
Well, no pressure, obviously. You got the whole campground there to watch Dr. Paul speak, and then I come up after him. And it was weird because I hadn't really been following the schedule very closely because I have a guy who handles, in fact, he's probably the one that you booked this with.
Brian.
He handles, Brian, he handles all that stuff. And so, I'm getting briefed on what we're doing the following day. And they're like, so Dr. Paul is going to speak, and then you're going to speak. And I went, I think you mean I'm going to speak and then Dr. Paul is going to speak. And they said, nope. He needs to do it in the morning. So we're going to go ahead and have him, and he'll basically be opening for you. And okay then. And so I actually started my speech saying, hey guys, in case you ever feel like you're under pressure, just remember, at least you're not following Ron Paul. But no, it was awesome. I had been wanting to go to Porcfest for quite some time. And so to be able to not just go, but be one of the, the main speakers there, and to, with that energy that was in the hall there with Ron Paul speaking in the pavilion, and then to speak right after that, and still have that energy going and everything. It was incredible. And then during my Q&A, David Friedman was one of the people who asked me a question, and I'm like, I'm following Ron Paul. I got David Friedman asking me a question. It was just, it was really an incredible experience for me, but honestly, it was incredible for everyone. I think Porcfest, I would strongly encourage, especially anyone who's never been, definitely go to Porcfest. It was a lot of fun. So many people in the liberty movement doing all sorts of different things. Just great food, great fun, great fellowship with other liberty-loving people from literally around the world. Some incredible speakers, incredible presenters and presentations. Just absolutely awesome. I met someone who actually used to sell milkshakes at Porcfest, and he would then take the money he would get for selling the milkshakes, and he would go to the Bitcoin ATM and buy Bitcoin. And he now owns, among other things, a $40 million yacht. Wow. Become a billionaire. Go to Porcfest.
You sold me, man. I got to go next year. I watched your speech. It was good. And one of the things I picked out of there, you said the best way to spread liberty is telling people they're wrong, argue with them on the internet, and make memes about how stupid they are.
Yeah. Yes. That is, if you got nothing else from that speech,
Yeah.
that is the most important thing, is to tell people they're wrong, argue with them on the internet, make memes about how stupid they are.
Yeah.
And if once you do that, that's everything else is easy after that.
Yeah. That's kind of where we all start. But no, I know you were joking about that. And although that is a whole lot of fun, part of the reason I got into doing this is that I could see that a lot of people were not good at communicating these ideas. And a lot of libertarians, God bless them, they're very quick to write people off if they're not 100% on the right page. And then it gets into kind of a toxic, vitriolic, one-sided attack in a lot of cases. So you actually made the point that we can boil liberty down to one word, and that is respect. Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bottom line, if you look at all of the philosophical underpinnings of libertarianism, non-aggression, self-ownership, individual autonomy, individualism, property rights, all of it boils down to respecting the fact that each one of us is an individual human being, giving that respect to others and having that respect from others. It is from that respect. So when I say respect, I don't necessarily mean that you respect someone's opinion or who they are as an individual, just that they are an individual. It's that intrinsic level of human respect. It's the reason why we don't step on other people the same way we would step on an insect or something like that. We intuitively understand that a human being is different than an animal or an insect or an object. It's a human being. And it's where all these other ideas come from. When you say don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, someone else could say, why? Why can't I hurt people or take their stuff? And if you say, well, because it's wrong, and they say, yeah, well, says who? Like, what makes that wrong? And, a lot of people will say, well, my faith or my God tells me that it's wrong, or, I just, believe deep down that it's wrong. But even all of those things boil down to why? Why did your God or your faith say it was wrong? Why do you deep down feel that it's wrong? It's because intuitively we understand that we have to respect one another, or that we do respect one another as individual human beings. When we respect one another as individual human beings, we are at our most prosperous, our most harmonious, and our happiest. And anytime we see crime or war or bad policy from government or theft or harm or anything else, it is when individual human beings are not being treated and respected as individual human beings. They're being treated as a mark or a target. They're being treated as a funding opportunity or a political opposition or an obstacle or something like that, but they're not being seen as a human being. And so when we boil it down to that, then that's a message that you could explain to a 7 or 8 year old. And not only would they agree with it, they'd already believe it. They'd be able to finish your sentence for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people kind of know this intuitively, at least when it comes to interactions with other random people. But when it comes to the government, that seems to fall apart. And you mentioned that in your speech. Why does that happen? What happens there?
Well, I think most of us, including many in the libertarian world, keep in mind, most of us were statists at some point. I know I was. We are conditioned to believe that in order for society, quote unquote, to function, we need to set aside that expectation of human respect when it comes to the government, right? Like you can't rob people, but you can tax them. The government, quote unquote, can tax us because we need things from the government. In order to pay for it, the government has to take money from us. And, you can't kidnap people and you can't beat up people, but the government can put you in jail, and the government can use force against you if they think that it's necessary to do so. And, we break these things down. And if an individual did this, right? So if an actual if one of the people that is in the government, if a politician or so forth, if they were out, they weren't wearing their fancy clothes, they weren't operating within their capacity as a government official, they were just out walking down the street, and they walked up to you and held a gun to you and said, give me half of what's in your wallet and I'll give some of it back to you if I think you need it. you're not going to comply. Or if you do, it's under duress. It's because you don't want to get shot or you don't want to get harmed. Maybe you'll fight back. Maybe you'll try to run away. Maybe you'll call out and ask for help. Or if you do comply, it'll be under duress, not because you thought that this was a good or fair or necessary arrangement. And yet, if that exact same person puts on a suit and now they're operating as a politician in the government, and they assemble a press conference where they say, I have great news for everyone. I'm implementing a new program where we're going to give money to people who need it, but only if they need it. We're not just handing it out to everyone, but if we decide that you need it, we're going to give you enough for what you need. And in order to pay for this, we're going to be implementing an income tax. That's the same thing. It's actually much worse, because instead of me just holding a gun to one person's head and saying, give me half your money, I'm telling everyone that, because the implied threat there is, if you don't pay this tax, we're going to use as much harm and threats as possible, as necessary, to make you pay that. And as Eric Garner learned, unfortunately, if they have to kill you, they'll kill you. Right. So it is an actual threat of violence. It's just that most of us are domesticated enough that we comply with it under duress. And the thing is, you and I and most people in the liberty world recognize that those are the same thing morally, and actually from the standpoint of how much harm is being done, it's actually much worse when the politician is doing it in their capacity as a government official. But most other people don't see it that way. They may think the tax is too high, or they may even think the tax is too low, or they may say, oh, well, what are we going to get in exchange for it? Or I want even more in exchange for that. Or I don't think I should have to pay as much. I think those people should have to pay more. I think that this should only should be paid by people who make a certain amount of money, or, however they look at it, but they don't look at it as what it is. It's a human being threatening other human beings in order to accomplish political goals. So when we accurately and consistently apply human respect and the demand to be treated as an individual human being across everything, then we would look at that politician doing that the same way we would look at them, holding a gun to someone's head and robbing them. And that's why in everything I do, in my messaging, in the work that we do at You Are the Power, and everything else, I am distilling down the fact that this isn't the government. This is human beings who are not treating other human beings like human beings. And when we demand that they treat us the same way that we would demand they treat us if they weren't the government, we can start actually being treated the way that we deserve, and we wouldn't see the harm that we see coming out of government.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the trick that they pull, is like, it's always somebody else doing it. Like, somebody else should pay for this. Not me, of course.
Yep.
Somebody else pays more taxes, and then someone else is taking from someone else. So I'm just separate from it. I think that's how they get away with it. But it ought to be just an easy concept to grasp. But for some reason, people don't have it, don't hear it, or won't hear it. I don't know. But speaking of people that are treated poorly by the government, the big news this week is Julian Assange was freed. Finally. He took a plea after being locked up for 5 years in London. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's great that he's free. He has suffered more than anyone, just about almost anyone else that has, and his crime was releasing the truth about the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton, releasing the truth about the war crimes that were being committed in Iraq, releasing the truth about so many things. And in exchange for that, he suffered more than anyone should have to suffer for that. So I'm glad he's home. I'm glad he's back with his wife, Stella. I'm glad that he can hopefully live the rest of his days out in peace, or however he chooses to live them out. What I don't like is that he had to accept a plea deal where he agreed that he committed a crime, which he did not. And that, he's now a felon for that. I don't know all the details of his plea deal, although I've been told that there aren't any kind of gag orders or anything else. He pretty much just had to admit that, he had to plead guilty and agree to destroy anything that hadn't already been released, which at this point, I would imagine everything had been released anyway. So there weren't really many conditions on it, other than he had to admit that he had to plead guilty and say that he was guilty of a crime. the bottom line here is the Espionage Act, which is what he was prosecuted under. It needs to go. It never should have existed. It is a gross violation of due process. It is a gross violation of freedom of speech. It allows the government to selectively decide what is journalism and what is espionage, and then prosecute people who basically release information that they don't want released. And what it does is it actually destroys journalism. Real journalism is finding the truth and then releasing it to the public. That's what actual journalism is. What we're told journalism is now, what the bastardized version of journalism that we usually get, is people building narratives, right? They don't just present you with the truth. They present you with a story to build a narrative to get you to a foregone, a foregone conclusion they want you to get to. And that's not what journalism is supposed to be. Journalism is supposed to be simply presenting the facts and then letting you make a choice based on it. And so Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were engaged in the purest form of journalism, where they would simply get information and then release all of it, even stuff that didn't matter. I mean, they would literally just dump these massive bits of data that would take people sometimes days and weeks to fully go through. A lot of it was stuff that wasn't even that relevant, but they just put it all out there so that it didn't look like they were hiding anything, right? And so, this is the purest form of journalism. And the fact that it is essentially criminal to engage in that kind of journalism in the U.S. Is just another reason why the Espionage Act absolutely needs to go. I think it's good that he's not there, that he's not in Belmarsh anymore, and he's not facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. But he never should have been facing that. He should have had ticker tape parades for his contributions to public knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. And this never should have happened in the first place. And the journalism thing, that's another big red pill a lot of people need to take, is that you kind of grow up with this idea that journalists are there to kind of be a check on government power and report on things they're doing, make sure it's all in the light. But when you grow up, you kind of find out not only do they not do that, but it's actually the opposite. They run cover for these people. They hide the things that should be exposed. And so, yeah, Assange is a hero. I'm glad he's free. Do you have any insight into why this is happening? Was it a case where the people in charge just said, okay, we made our point, you agree to this felony and we'll let you go? Is that what happened, or something else?
Yeah, so I don't have any kind of inside information, but I will say this. Here's my theory. I think that a political calculus was made. We are coming into the hottest months of this election cycle. The last few months before election day are when they're at their hottest. And they were facing Julian Assange coming to Virginia and being tried publicly in what could have turned into the trial of the century, and then being able to appeal that as well, and all sorts of dirty laundry getting released in doing that. And they had just seen that Trump had promised to commute Ross Ulbricht's sentence. If Julian Assange had been able to, and if his attorneys had been able to create enough of a furor over what was happening in the trial there in the U.S., it would have been easy, a slam dunk for Trump to say, or RFK Jr., or for that matter, Chase or anyone else running, but especially Trump, to say, I'll drop these charges. I'm very worried. I can already hear him saying, many people are saying that he's a hero and a journalist. And I said back in 2015 that I love WikiLeaks. And so I will either pardon Julian Assange, or just drop the charges if they're still pending at the time, and if he's still under trial. And then that would force Biden to either preemptively do it, which now makes it look like that he's, reacting to Trump and not doing things based on justice, but based on politics, or to continue and double down on the trial, which, again, if it goes sour for the Department of Justice, could actually hurt him and could be a contributing factor to him losing. So I think they just looked at it and they're like, this is a political hot potato that we don't have to deal with. And it's easier just to let him plead guilty And we can say justice was served. He already had spent many years in jail over this, and he admitted that what he did was a crime, and, justice has been done, than to, roll the dice and potentially have it majorly affect the election. So I don't know that that's what it is, but I suspect that's what it is. And the bottom line is, every person who has been out there calling for justice for Julian Assange and free Julian Assange, you have your, maybe it's 1/10 millionth share, or, whatever it is. You have your small claim to be able to say that you are a part of why he's free right now. Because without that political pressure, there'd be no reason for them not to continue persecuting him and doing what they were doing to him. So that's what I think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Ross Ulbricht. He's kind of the natural next thought after that happened. Like,
yes,
okay, Assange is free. Ross Ulbricht should not be in prison for starting a website. So I know you tweeted about this as well. Do you have any hope for that happening in the near future?
Well, I do, because, and I should say this, I have more hope that he will be free than I did, say, a year ago, largely because Donald Trump came to the Libertarian Convention and promised to free him. Now, I want to be very clear about something. The fact that Donald Trump said it in and of itself is not reason to believe it's going to happen. Donald Trump has said he's going to do a lot of things that he doesn't do. But by saying that, it led millions of Americans the following morning after he did that, and for days after, to look up who Ross Ulbricht was, find out about his story and the absurd circumstances behind his prosecution and everything else, and realize that the whole thing was a sham and that he never should have gone to jail to begin with. Or at the very least, even if you take the more moderate take, that, yeah, he committed a crime, but he's already done far more time than anyone else who's been prosecuted for similar things. It's definitely time for him to be able to go home. That shifts that window of perception over in our favor towards freeing Ross, which ironically makes it more politically expedient for Trump to actually do it if he gets elected. And the proof of that is after he said he would do that, for weeks or months, RFK Jr., whenever he's been asked about it, he said, well, I'm looking into it, and it's something I'm considering. Donald Trump said that he'd commute it, and within, I think, that same week, certainly within a matter of days, RFK Jr. came out and said, I'll pardon Ross, not just commute a sentence, I will give him a full pardon. And of course, now there's more of us that are saying, hey, Biden, you want to undercut support for Trump and RFK Jr.? There are a lot of people that are going to vote for Trump on one single issue, the fact that he said he's going to free Ross. If you do it first, that's going to undercut a lot of the support and votes that Trump's going to get. And it doesn't really cost you anything. So yeah, the fact that he said he was going to do it helped to speed along the possibility that it is actually going to happen. Not in and of itself because he said he would, but because of what that did for the overall public perception and debate about it. And so for that, I will credit the Libertarian Party for getting Trump to come out on that condition and giving him that chance to promise to do that, which opened that up and breathed all sorts of new life into the Free Ross movement. And to be clear, the Libertarian Party has supported freeing Ross Ulbricht from day one. Our campaign in 2020 put out a statement saying that we would pardon or commute Ross's sentence as well. So that's nothing new, but this was a big thing, and it was in part a coup that the Libertarian Party helped to create. So kudos to everyone involved in the party.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I want to come back to Trump later if we have time, but I think
sure.
Something more important, actually, is your organization. You Are the Power. You're doing similar things. I'd say it's up there with the Free Ross campaign. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about You Are the Power, but maybe aren't exactly sure what the mission is. So can you talk about your goals with that?
Yeah, so You Are the Power. We find people who are being abused by their local governments and their state governments. We get their cause out to the public. We give an immediate call to action. Instead of just saying, hey, here's this terrible thing that's happening, you should be mad about it. We say, here's this terrible thing that's happening, here's how you can help us stop it. And what we do is we organize the public to swarm the social media, the email inboxes, the voicemail boxes of the public officials that are doing this harm, and we basically cyberbully them until they do the right thing and back off and stop harming these people. And in presenting these causes to people, the underlying message behind all these causes and the wording templates that we give people to send out in emails or to put in their mentions on social media or to leave on these officials' voicemails and so forth also have this, that this is about the fact that these are individual human beings and that you should stop treating them like a political prop or something, that an obstacle that's in your way or an opportunity to make more money or an opportunity to steal someone's house or whatever the case may be in that cause. They're not that. They're a human being, and you need to start treating them like that. And so not only are we getting people, the public, behind helping people that are being harmed by getting the government to back off, but we're also, in doing so, we're kind of exposing them to the idea over and over again with cause after cause after cause, with the fact that none of this would even be happening if government officials were expected to respect us as individual human beings. And so instead of trying to argue with people about politics or trying to convince them of the philosophical underpinnings of libertarianism or any of that, instead I say, here is a family that's being destroyed because Child Protective Services gets paid by the federal government to call cases abuse, even if they're not abuse. And here is the harm that's being done to that family. Or here is a small business or a family whose home or business is being stolen using eminent domain by their local government because they can, and they want that land. They want to do whatever they want with it, and they don't care if it displaces a family or destroys a small business. Or here's a lady who was rebuilding her home, and the zoning board found some loophole that they could try to steal her property because she had a camper on the property and that wasn't allowed. Or a host of other things that we've worked with. Here's a charity that's helping people get back on their feet, and they're being threatened by the police because the local government has an agreement with a local NGO to provide charity services, and the taxpayers are going to start wondering why they need to be taxed to pay for that when people are out doing it with their own money. And so they cut off they try to scare off all the competition. We bring to cause after story after story to the public of examples of what happens when government officials are not being expected to respect people as individual human beings. And then instead of just saying, hey, this is a terrible thing, you should be mad about it, we give them a call to action to target those government officials and say, stop doing this, both through online activism. And if that doesn't work, which increasingly it does work, but in those cases where it doesn't work, then we show up to their council meetings. We show up to their zoning board meetings. We show up in person and say, back off and do the right thing. And then when we win on that one, we give them another one and another one and another one and another one. And we get people actively involved as activists in the liberty movement and have them learn to actually win, not just express their frustration and their anger and rage and shake their fist at the sky in impotent rage, but actually find things that we can win on and encourage people to join us to win in those causes and help people who need help now to get the government off of their back, and then do the next one and the next one and the next one. And in doing so, consistently explain to them that this is why we need to expect and demand that we are respected as individual human beings. We're bringing people into the liberty movement through activism first, and then adoption through activism.
Yeah, I think you've, I wouldn't say stumbled on, I think you intentionally hit it. You found something that's really effective. And I think the reason has something to do with a psychological concept. Like if you hear about a story where 1,000 people were killed in a bombing or something, you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, that's sad, of course. But if you hear one person's specific story, that's really, really effective in getting people to understand the gravity of it. And you relate to that as a human. So I think it's fantastic what you're doing. How do you find these people to help?
So that's actually the easy part. In fact, if anything, it's like drinking from a fire hose. Initially, when You Were the Power started, we kind of went out and tried to find people who were being harmed by their local governments so we could have some, starter cases to get started with. That's not a problem anymore. We now are having literally hundreds of different causes brought to our attention. So now the bulk of our work is in vetting those causes to see if they're true, because a lot of what's brought to our attention, unfortunately, is not true, or they're not presenting the whole story. There's some missing context that, once you get that context, you realize it's not quite as cut and dry as it was presented. And then we look for the ones that we can actually do something about. Is there something actionable here? Is this something that's still active that we can try to get them to back off and undo this harm? Or is this something that happened years ago that, everything's already been done? There's not much we can do except tell people about it. And then, are these things that the public are going to, gasp at and be shocked that it's happening and that it's going to inspire them to actually get involved? And when we find those causes that are true, that are actionable, and that we know are going to, tug at the public's heartstrings and get them to want to be involved, we then create the plans of action. We bring it out to our members and then to the public to let them know what we're doing and what has happened. And we create content that very often goes viral, gets millions or tens of millions of views. And more importantly, we're not just getting attention; we're directly funneling it into action. Here is a thing that you can do that can take just a couple of minutes. Send out this email, leave this voicemail, tag these people in your mentions, go on their social media and tell them what they're doing and that you want them to stop. And what we're seeing is that when these officials get way more heat than they've ever seen before, the vast majority of the time they back off. Sometimes they dig in their heels, and then that's when we start doing in-person rallies and stuff like that. But for the most part, we're finding more and more we don't even have to do that. Which is weird because a year or so ago, I would have guessed that most of our causes would end in us actually having to do on the ground, in-person rallies. And what we're finding is as we're getting bigger and bigger, and as that heat that we're able to bring down through online and in their emails and on their voicemails, as that increases, so too does the odds that they immediately back off as soon as they get that pressure, because they're not used to hundreds or thousands of people angrily emailing them and mentioning them on social media and calling them and leaving voicemail messages and all of that. And so the hard part is not finding these causes. They are brought to us. We don't have to seek them out anymore. The hard part is vetting the ones that and finding the ones that we know are really going to take off and are really going to inspire people to want to be involved.
Yeah. Oh, good. When I asked that question, I was a little worried. I don't know if you're a Norm Macdonald fan, but he would have his sidekick ask people, where do you get your ideas?
Where do you get where's your inspiration come from? Yeah. Where do you get your jokes from? Yeah.
I've been dying to know, where do you get your ideas from?
Why didn't you answer his question?
What was his question?
Ask it again.
Don't ask that again. That was the dumbest goddamn question I've ever heard.
So, yeah, you recently helped, it sounds like more than one couple get their children back after some abuse allegations. You've told this story several times, so I won't make you recount it all again. But so they get a diagnosis from a doctor, but they still get taken away from the family because someone comes in. I'm not exactly clear on this, but someone within the state organization comes in and says, actually, this is an abuse case and there's no trial. There's no anything. They just take the kids away. How does that happen?
Here's how it works. And it's easiest this is why I've said this story so many times. It's easiest to actually tell it through the story because that explains all the steps too. Yeah. And I'll use one of the families, one of the first ones we found out about, which was the Hernandez family in Georgia. Husband and wife, Matt and Taki Hernandez, they had two daughters, at the time, newborn child, Emma, and I believe 3-year-old child named Aria, a toddler named Aria. And Emma was having some health issues, and one day she was one of her legs was swelling and she was fussy, and so they took her to the pediatrician, who said, you should probably take her to the hospital. So they took her to Children's Hospital of Atlanta. She got an x-ray and some blood work done. The x-ray showed that there were some new fractures on her legs, and also some old fractures that were at various stages of healing. The blood work later came back and showed that she likely had one of two different health conditions, chronic health conditions, that would explain those fractures and some of the other symptoms that she was experiencing. One of which is a lifelong chronic illness, a genetic disorder that can be fatal. It will be fatal if left untreated. And so the child abuse pediatrician at the hospital looked at this and said, this is abuse. All of the medical evidence showed that it was not abuse. But instead of looking at this child and saying, this is abuse, they looked at this child and said, I'm going to get federal money, because the federal government, under Title IV of the Social Security Act, anytime that a state children's protective services calls a case abuse, they get money from the federal government. Every time that the what's that?
Can I pause you there? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
But is there a reason for that? Is there some good reason why that was implemented in the first place? Do you know?
Oh, I would imagine it was just, well, we have all these abuse cases and we have a hard time having funding. And so the government said, okay, well, then we'll fund, we'll fund your abuse cases. But if you only give them money if they call it abuse, you're providing a perverse incentive for them to call every possible case abuse. And then they give them even more money if the child is placed for foster care and taken from the parents. And then they give them even more money if they're placed for adoption and taken from the parents permanently. And then if it turns out the kid is sick later on, they get even more money. So when that child abuse pediatrician sees this kid with, fractures, which look like they're being caused by a health issue, instead of looking at this child as an individual human being and saying, oh my gosh, we need to get this kid the care that it needs because this could be a fatal illness if left untreated, they go, cha-ching. We know the kind of money we'll get from this. And not just the child abuse pediatrician, the caseworker, the child protective services caseworker, the caseworker's supervisor, the caseworker's department, the family court judge and the family court system, the foster parents, the so-called the Thrive centers, or which are these visitation centers where the parents can visit their children while they're in foster care, and many other vendors up and down this pipeline of child protective services. They're all in on it. They're all getting money for this. And so, this family, once they finally fought and got their medical records for their daughter, they went to the court. They went to the family court and said, oh, good. They'll give us the kid back. We have all the evidence. The judge wouldn't allow the evidence to be admitted. The judge was intent that this was abuse. And as part of the conditions when the father was arrested for abuse, when his children were taken from him, part of the conditions were he also wasn't allowed to talk with his wife or live with her or even be within however many feet of her in order for him to even be allowed to go home. So not only did they take his kids from him, and not only did they take her kids from her, they weren't even allowed to talk with one another. So they literally had their entire family torn apart. So we came forward with this cause, and we created the call to action. Here are the different officials involved that you can contact. And as that was happening, a bunch of other families came out of the woodwork with the exact same stories over and over again. We have a kid with a health problem, Ehlers-Danlos, osteogenesis imperfecta, neonatal rickets, a bunch of other things as well. And they called it abuse with all the evidence pointing at it not being abuse. We vetted those cases as well. 100%. All of them were the exact same thing. And so now not only are we helping many families get reunited and putting pressure on many public officials, but now we're actually working with elected officials to create model legislation to fix the perverse incentive funding and have the funding based on, at the state level, have it based on just doing the work, not a specific outcome, calling it abuse or calling it not abuse, and also reintroducing due process when there is a accusation of child abuse. That should be treated like any other crime, with a criminal court level of due process and burden of evidence, and not just some judge arbitrarily deciding if they think you did it or not even allowing you to, deciding whether they'll even allow you to present your evidence. I mean, forget guilty until proven innocent. This is guilty and not even allowed to prove that you're innocent. We need to have it innocent until proven guilty. And so we're working on that. But here's how that helped this family. After months of not having their children, the children are back home with family now, and the parents, Matt and Tucky, can now see their children whenever they want to. And once we are successful in getting the criminal charges dropped, they will be back in home with their family where they belong, and this nightmare will be behind them. That judge, after months of essentially not even allowing these parents to defend themselves effectively, did a complete 180 and actually moved to drop the Division of Family and Children Services case. So there is no more family court case. The judge, after getting thousands of angry emails, she just miraculously decided to do a complete 180. And now we're working to do the same on the criminal charges as well. Because to be clear, there is no, and it's likely there will never be an actual indictment or a prosecution, because all the evidence is that he's innocent and that there was no abuse. So we're working to get those charges dropped as well. And also, they changed the bond conditions so that after nearly a year of being separated from one another, Matt and Taki Hernandez are living together as husband and wife. That is what happens when, instead of raging at the sky and saying how corrupt and hopeless everything is, we actually work together to put pressure on these officials and demand that they respect us as individual human beings.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And just the fact that one of these cases exists, let alone multiple cases, is shocking. It's hard to even fathom that happening to you. So
yep.
That's great.
And that's how we present these stories, by the way. Instead of, very often libertarians, we think in systems and in policies and in ideas. And the problem, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually, we're the world changers. We think the way that the people who change the world think, because they don't get caught up in this individual person or this individual group. They look at the whole thing. They take a step back and we think much more abstractly. And that's good. But the problem is, when we communicate our ideas to other people, we talk about ideas and philosophies. And so where before you were talking about how, when they hear about 1,000 people being killed, they go, oh, that's so tragic. But when they hear one story, they get invested and, it jerks at, it tugs at their heartstrings. We don't talk about the 1,000 people that get killed. We say there's this policy in place that could lead to thousands of people being killed. That just, for the most people, they don't think that way, right? And it's frustrating, because if people did think that way, then they couldn't be led around by their noses by public officials and corporate media. But they do think that way. And we're not going to change the fact that people think that way. They're hardwired to think that way. So if instead we present these stories of individual human beings and individual families that are having these horrific things happening to them, and present it in such a way that these folks understand this could happen to you. You are not safe from this happening. You are at the mercy of not being the one that gets picked to be treated this way. If you have a child, this unfortunately could happen to you. If you have a small business or a desirable property, you could be the victim of eminent domain. If you you do something and the zoning board wants to steal your property, they could find some excuse to do it to you. If your grandfather lives with you and your state is basically trying to traffic older people into their state-run nursing facilities that no one wants, they could find some excuse to make your grandfather not be able to live with you anymore. These are all things that we've worked on before. And when we present it that way, it changes everything. We have, an increasing number of the people that are some of the most effective activists and the most active advocates and members of You Are the Power are not philosophical libertarians. They're soccer moms. They're people that are, and not to say a soccer mom can't be a libertarian, but they're like people that aren't even part of the movement or haven't been up to this point. They just see these causes and they say, this is terrible. I need to do something. And so we give them something to do. And then they do it. And then it works. And we give them another one. And they go, this is terrible. I need to do something. And we give them something to do. And they do it. And it works. And now they're excited to find out about these causes because they know that they're helping people. And as they're doing it, they're being exposed to the consistent message that this is what happens when we don't demand that we are respected as individual human beings. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to demand that these people and all of us are respected as individual human beings. And then they don't just hear that, they then do it. They send emails, they send voicemail messages, they, send messages on social media and comments on social media where they're now saying, do the right thing here. Treat us like human beings. Treat these people like individual human beings. So they're not just hearing it, they're not just agreeing with it, they're adopting it and then echoing it. And so they're actually becoming evangelists for the underlying distilled message of liberty, even as they're still being exposed to our ideas. This is how we grow a movement. This is how people successfully grow a movement, is they find that things that pulls at people's heartstrings, and then they encourage them to adopt the principle through action, even as they're still learning it.
Yeah, that would be a really powerful place to end, but I'm not going to. Got a few more minutes here. I really love what you're doing. I think it's fantastic. And like you said, you get these people involved in an individual case, and you're going bottom up. They're growing to learn more about the ideas behind the issues that are happening. So I just think it's fantastic. I love it. I'm joining myself. So please
Thank you.
Go join You Are the Power. Help them out. But on the other end, we have the Libertarian Party. We mentioned that a little bit. We're about a month now out of the convention, and I can still feel the swamp on me. I haven't fully recovered from it. But a lot of people, including the LNC chair, don't seem to be too thrilled about the outcome, at least of the presidential race. So not going to ask you how you feel about any individuals, but as a whole, instead, I'm wondering, what's your advice to these people who are feeling like the party may not be for them and their preferred candidate is not on top? How do we go about that? Is it even worth fighting for?
Yeah, so that's a personal choice for every individual to make. And I learned a long time ago, when it comes to who someone supports for a candidate or for a party, it's not as useful to try to tell them, hey, I think you should support this candidate or this party or any of that stuff. So, whether people want to be active or involved in the party or in Chase's campaign or anything like that, that's really an individual choice for every person to make. What I will tell you is that coming out of the convention, I am more convinced than ever that while their electoral politics may be a necessary component to spread liberty, I am increasingly convinced that it's not the main one, and may not even be one of the most effective ones. And here's why I say that. That convention, most of the time, was spent with us fighting each other. We had an opportunity to put our presidential candidate front and center in front of Donald Trump and Bobby Kennedy Jr. And instead, we spent that time arguing over which delegates would be seated, and then arguing over who the chair would be. The delegates thing was unfortunately unavoidable because you can't start voting until you have delegates. But the chair thing could have waited until afterwards. We could have picked a chair afterwards. Our number one priority after getting our delegates seated should have been to pick the presidential candidate, because now, in front of C-SPAN and all the media and everyone else that was there and all the people that were streaming it and everything else, we would put our candidate front and center in front of the Republican and independent candidates. But we didn't, because both sides saw the other side as an existential threat to the party and to liberty. And so they were so blinded by that they fought over that instead. Even though if you take the most shrill, vociferous member of this faction and the most shrill, vociferous member of this faction and have them write down their position on, say, 20 issues that you pick out of random, they're probably going to agree on like at least 15 of them. Possibly all of them, but certainly most of them. But the problem is the democratic process of choosing a chair and a candidate and a secretary and a vice chair and all the stuff that you have to vote for, it necessitates that we look for each other's differences and then primarily focus on those differences in order to figure out who's going to run the show. Because if I have to convince people to vote for me and not for you, even if we agree on 99.9% of things, I have to make them think that 0.01% is so important that they need to pick me and not you, and you need to do the same thing. And over time, that creates two factions. It creates a fault line based on those absurd differences, and it forces us to fight each other. And over time, it becomes less and less about the actual differences and more about our hatred of one another. You have one faction that calls the other side Nazis and white supremacists. You have one faction that calls the other side a bunch of woke degenerates who hate America and our culture. And this is what Democrats and Republicans say about each other. Even though the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans look exactly like each other and act exactly like each other, and they just vote this way or this way. And that's true of these factions as well within the party. We've created a duopoly in the party, and it is a necessary function of the conflict machine that is democracy. And so if we are to have that as the function by which we pick the leadership of our party, this is always going to happen. And I don't know that we can't have it that way. I think we actually have to have it that way in order to be seen as a legitimate political party. And if that's the case, then that means that we are doing the opposite of liberty. See, factionalism and the conflict machine that is democracy is the opposite of liberty. It's the opposite of human respect. It necessitates and demands that we collectivize ourselves and one another and then treat each other along the fault lines of those collectivizations that we created. So it's the opposite of what it is that we want to do. And so are we able to take the opposite of liberty or the opposite of our principles of individualism and self-ownership and non-aggression and human respect and use an engine for the opposite to spread liberty? Possibly. But I'll tell you something. I'd much rather use a model that maximizes our ideals instead of does the opposite of them and then hopes to be able to implement what we want. And so I will say that I'm less and less involved in party politics. And I want to be clear, that's not because Chase got the nomination. I would have had the same opinion if Rec had gotten the nomination or Lars or any of them had gotten the nomination, if it had still played out the way that it played out, because I would have realized this is the conflict machine. So this is not a condemnation of the current leadership or the previous leadership of the party or of any faction or anything like that. It is, I believe that, put it this way, there are people in the Libertarian Party who are on the different opposite factions and they fight head to head all day long. And then they come over to You Are the Power and work together. I don't think it's the people. I think it's the model. And so I increasingly, it's not, I'm not quitting the party or I'm not no longer going to be involved with the party or anything else. But I increasingly am just over here doing my thing with You Are the Power. And to whatever extent the mission and vision of the party and various campaigns and what I'm doing with You Are the Power, to whatever extent they align, then that's great. But I will say, first of all, You Are the Power is a nonpartisan nonprofit, so we aren't affiliated with or against any party or campaign anyway. But I will also say, just personally, I find joy and fulfillment in what I do with You Are the Power. We're reuniting families. We're bringing back together things that were being torn apart. And in doing so, we're also bringing people to the liberty message and the liberty movement. And then whenever I'm involved in stuff related to the party and with campaigns, I have people arguing with me because I'm supporting this candidate or I'm helping this state affiliate or people are saying, oh, you're a part of this faction because I'm literally just working with whoever the leadership is. And I get attacked from both sides on it. And if I have to choose between one or another, I obviously choose You Are the Power.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. I think it's just an indictment on the democratic process, most of all.
Yeah.
And I think I've taken enough of your time. Where can people go to find you and support you?
Yeah, so if you're looking for me on social media, that's pretty easy. I'm everywhere. You just look for Spike Cohen, you'll find me. If you want to be a part of the fastest growing and most effective, increasingly most effective organization in the liberty movement, I encourage you to join You Are the Power. If you go to youarethepower.net, you can become a member today. I'd love to have you be a part of that. If you want to see the upcoming events that I'm going to be at, if you go to spikecohen.com, we have those listed out. I'm going to be at Freedom Fest in July, and then in August, I'm going to be at YALCon, the Young Americans for Liberty Convention in Orlando. But if you go to spikecohen.com, you can see all of that. And if at any point you get lost and you're having a hard time finding me, just go to whatever government agency's social media out page, and you'll probably find me on there cyberbullying them with a bunch of other people.
Yep, that's the best part. Well, thanks, Spike. I'm no Michael Malice, but I'm going to pull one of his tricks here. What was your favorite part of this interview?
My favorite part of this interview was talking about You Were the Power.
Well, thanks again. Talk to you later, Spike. Have a good one.
Thank you, Jason.